Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to this event exploring issues around population aging and urbanisation. And we have three excellent speakers, Tine Buffel, Emily Greenfield, and Paul McGarry. And briefly, this event is to launch the Manchester Urban Aging Research Group. My name's Chris Phillipson. I'm at the University of Manchester and one of the members of Manchester Urban Aging Research Group. And over the past few years, we've been developing a research profile looking at a range of issues around age-friendly cities, working in partnership with a range of different local authorities and different types of organizations. And this event was planned to formalize the different types of work which we've been doing, led by my colleague, Tine Buffel. And if I can introduce Tine now, Tine is going to talk about how the research group developed, but she's also going to mention the very big research program which she's just starting, funded by the Leverhulme Trust, Population Aging and Urbanisation, Interdisciplinary Perspectives on Aging in Place in Cities. So Tine, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Can I just double check, can you see my screen sharing?
Yep.
Perfect.
All good.
So thanks everyone for joining us today in the launch of our new research project on aging in place in cities. This particular project is in fact part of a larger body of work focusing on population aging and urban change, led by the Manchester Urban Aging Research Group. And my talk, entitled Co-Producing Spatial Justice with Older People, aims to provide an overview of some of the key research projects led by our group, as well as the broader aims and objectives, and how our research and the key questions that we address link to ideas around creating spatial justice in cities. So the Manchester Urban Aging Research Group brings together scholars from different disciplines and backgrounds to identify new ways of how we can respond to the challenges and opportunities associated with population aging in urban environments. So our focus is on two of the most important trends facing contemporary societies: population aging on the one hand and urbanization on the other. And understanding the interaction between those two developments is especially important because more than half of the world's population is now aging in urban areas. But if you think about it, actually a lot of our cities are often planned and structured and designed with a younger working age demographic in mind. And older people are often or typically not incorporated into mainstream thinking and planning around the development of urban environments. As well as aging populations, cities are of course also facing challenges linked to climate change, migration, housing, infrastructure, pressures on resources, and multiple forms of inequalities within and between cities and amongst urban populations. Inequalities which have been further exacerbated in the context of COVID-19. And all of these pressures present particular challenges, challenges to the current policy ideal of aging in place, or supporting people to age at home in their own communities of choice whilst aging. And one of the key objectives of our group is to examine how we can improve the experience of aging in place by supporting the development of age-friendly cities, or environments that are supportive of the needs of people as they grow older. And we have a particular focus on neighborhoods facing challenges linked to urban change and deprivation. And we do this by bringing together insights from social gerontology, the study of aging on the one hand, with theories around urban change coming from sociology, geography, anthropology, and architecture on the other. But what we all share and what makes us, I think, unique as a group is firstly our focus on urban aging. And secondly, the fact that much of our work is embedded in a critical gerontology framework, which refers to our joint commitment, not just to understand the inequalities that shape the aging process, but also to challenge them by involving older people and working collaboratively with different stakeholder groups in different phases of the research process. So we strongly believe in co-production and the power of partnerships between policy, practice, and research to improve the lives of older people, with a particular focus on reducing social exclusion in later life experienced by groups of people living in neighborhoods characterized by multiple forms of deprivation. So we examine different interpretations of aging in place, recognizing forms of inequality facing particular groups, for example, in relation to health, income, housing, as well as understanding the impact of racism, ageism, and sexism within communities. So a lot of our work can be framed with the concept of spatial justice, which links together thinking around social justice on the one hand and space on the other, building on the work of geographers like David Harvey and Edward Soja, for example. So spatial justice reflects an intentional and a focused emphasis on questions around justice and injustice, and brings for us new opportunities for urban aging, both in terms of theory development as well as empirical analysis of the ways in which resources can be distributed in a fairer and more equitable way, and how opportunities to use those resources in cities can be realized. So spatial justice brings a focus on questions of redistribution, the democratic experience of cities, and citizen empowerment, reflecting Lefebvre's work, for example, about the right to the city or the right of urban dwellers to participate centrally in decision-making around the production of urban space. Our group applies these ideas to aging issues, so bringing in a life course perspective to understand not only how the lives of people are impacted upon by living in unequal and urban environments over time, but also how older people can be fully engaged in shaping the future of those urban environments. So bringing together spatial and urban perspectives with social gerontology and aging studies, some of the key questions that our group focuses on are listed here on this slide. For example, in what ways have cities responded to the challenges associated with different types of demographic change and population aging? How can we bring together expertise from different disciplines, policy and practice to improve the experience of aging in place? And how can we support the co-production of age-friendly initiatives to ensure that older people are involved in decisions around the planning and development of cities? And finally, to what extent does the development of age-friendly policies support spatial justice in cities? This slide presents some of the projects that we are currently leading on or have led on in the past, presenting some of the key principles that reflect a lot of our work. And a lot of our projects clearly demonstrate the kind of collaborative nature that we approach in our research, and the importance that we put on bringing together multiple disciplinary perspectives. We also work with local and regional governments and a range of international research institutes and policy organizations that are really important in shaping our work. And just to give 2 examples of research projects here, the first one is, of course, the project that we are launching today, which will contribute new knowledge about how urban environments can be developed to meet the needs of a growing and increasingly diverse older population. And we will do this by examining the role of age-friendly policies and initiatives in shaping aging in place in 7 cities: Akita in Japan, Bilbao in Spain, Brno in the Czech Republic, Brussels in Belgium, Manchester in the UK, Oslo in Norway, and Quebec in Canada. And for this project, we also would really very much like to get your input and like to learn about what you would like to learn about other cities and how they approach age-friendly initiatives. So we will share to that end a very short survey with 2-3 questions where you will be able to share your interest in the key topics that you would like us to address in this study. A second example of a research project we lead on is our COVID-19 and social exclusion study, supported by a range of partners listed here on the slide. Yesterday was in fact the launch of this report of this study with Chris and other members of the teams, as well as comments from the mayor, Andy Burnham, commenting on the research. And this report is now also publicly available and can be shared with you. So for this study, we worked together with a range of community stakeholders in Greater Manchester during the course of 3 national lockdowns to examine the experiences of people living in low-income neighborhoods and those experiencing some form of social exclusion. And interviews were carried out with 21 community organizations and 102 community members. And what made this study particularly unique was that it focused on including the experiences of older people from different ethnic minority groups to reflect the diversity of the older population in Greater Manchester. This study also took a longitudinal approach to understanding the experiences of the pandemic of older people over time. In terms of our future plans and activities, there will be a number of events that you can all get involved in and will be open to everyone. And these will, for example, include knowledge exchange events, which will bring together different experts on specific topics relating to urban aging. For the next year, for example, we will have discussions around spatial justice, structural racism, public policy making in age-friendly cities. And much of our activities will also be focused around promoting co-production approaches and deepening collaborations with a range of stakeholders. We also aim to secure funding for the further development of our group, and with the aim of becoming an established research center around creating inclusive, just and age-friendly cities. And this is a slide which presents some of our key reports and books which we have worked on over the past years, some focusing on issues around housing, others around aging in gentrifying neighborhoods, a few on participatory and community-based approaches to aging in place, and others on developing age-friendly cities. And on our website, you can find all of our publications. If you want to find out more about the project on aging in place in different cities, we've produced a short film which talks about that particular project. Again, you can find that on our website or on YouTube. It is publicly available. As I said before, collaborating with different stakeholders and groups and community organizations is a real key aspect of our work. And these are some of the partners who we work with at the moment. If you would like to find out more, please check the website. We also recently, last week, in fact, set up a Twitter account. So you're very welcome to follow us on there. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina. That was terrific. And could I encourage people to put questions in the Q&A box, and we'll pick those up at the end. But just to emphasize, I think, a couple of points from Tina. I think this is a really exciting research agenda that's developed, partly because of all the changes that are happening to cities. I think still older people and the position of older people has been neglected in all of that. So having a research group that's focusing on these issues is very important. Particularly important, I think, as Tina emphasized, having one with a critical perspective, thinking about the way inequalities emerge and unfold within the context of changing cities and the influences on cities. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our second speaker, Professor Emily Greenfield from Rutgers. It is a real privilege for me because Emily's work has been enormously influential in the age-friendly field, and she's really developed some pioneering studies with colleagues in the United States around the village model, around naturally occurring retirement communities, but also, I think, really influencing our work in terms of the issue of partnerships and working with different groups and how you can develop a research agenda with a range of organizations and try to influence organizations through research. So Emily, it's great to have you presenting at this event, and we're all very much looking forward to hearing from you. So over to you.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and to everyone for the opportunity to be with you today. I consider myself to be a longtime follower and fan of the Manchester Urban Aging Research Group. And so when I was asked to deliver the keynote today, it was such an easy yes. It's such an honor and privilege to be here. And I'm so happy to be able to mark the beginning of this next phase of your important work by sharing in today's launch event with you all. Before I go into my talk, I want to take just a minute to acknowledge an important context for my own scholarship in this presentation. Go to the next slide. Geographically, I am seated in the state of New Jersey, which is a state on land nestled between two major American cities, Philadelphia toward the south and New York City toward the north. My university, Rutgers, is located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. Tribes that are recognized by the state of New Jersey include the Nanitoki Lenape, the Powhatan Lenape Nation, and the Ramapo Lenape. I acknowledge this fact with humility and gratitude. Next slide. One of the many things that makes work on age-friendly cities and communities so exciting is the ways in which our efforts cut across challenges and opportunities at multiple and embedded geographic levels. The very existence of the movement itself speaks to how progress on the global level has such strong potential to influence action at the local level. And on the flip side, how developments at the local level can continue to inspire innovation at the regional, national, and international levels. While recognizing this constant interplay across geographic levels as fundamental to age-friendly city and community work, I want to begin by situating my talk at the international level, focusing on the global age-friendly cities and communities movement. This movement, of course, was founded by the World Health Organization in the first decade of the 21st century, and in many ways continues to be led by the World Health Organization and its affiliate organizations worldwide. As the movement expands, deepens, and arguably matures, the movement now encompasses the thoughts, passions, desires, and actions of thousands of individuals, groups, and organizations across diverse geographic and socio-political settings. So in our short time together now, I will develop my talk in three major sections. First, by noting a cause for celebration, then by pausing for a point of critical reflection, and finally by describing a promising direction for theoretical and practical advancements, especially as it concerns advancing equity and aging in communities. Next slide, please. So to begin on a note of celebration. So as a gerontologist and as a person who aspires to live a long and good life, I am deeply grateful to live in a historical moment where the global age-friendly cities and community movement exists and is arguably flourishing. This movement has sparked the imaginations of a collective worldwide to talk about, think about, and do about aging in 21st century ways. If population aging and extended human life expectancy are considered one of the great achievements of the 20th century, it's my hope that age-friendly will be the great follow-up achievement of the 21st century. And so far, things are looking good for progress in this century, at least as indicated by the growing number of cities and community leaders that are committing to age-friendly goals and aspirations. So the figure on this slide, of course, is from this World Health Organization report in 2018, demonstrating the dramatic growth in the World Health Organization's global network of age-friendly cities and communities as one indicator of growth in the movement and of the people who are deliberately thinking about population aging and committing to doing more and better in response to population aging. We can see from this figure that in January of 2010, when the World Health Organization initiated this network, there were just 11 communities, and I note that Manchester was one of them. By January of 2018, this number grew to 760 cities and communities, which represents a 6,809% increase. We can fast forward 3.5 years later to today in 2021, and we see a further increase of 46.58%, with, as of yesterday, 1,114 cities and communities as part of the network. This growth is indeed cause for celebration. Next slide, please. At the same time as we celebrate this accomplishment, it is also important, of course, to further reflect on opportunities for continued growth, not just growth in the number of dots on the global map, but also growth in the depth and quality of the work that these dots signify. As I have learned from my own qualitative interviews with leaders of age-friendly community initiatives represented by some of these dots in my own geographic region, each point in the map represents a community on an age-friendly journey. How can we as a movement orient more attention to the quality, the meaning, and the rhythm of their trajectories of this community or city's age-friendly progress and move beyond mere recognition that they are, in fact, on a journey? Next slide, please. An emerging discourse on age-friendly city and community implementation and the long-term development of age-friendly community initiatives is increasingly orienting to this issue. How can we ascertain the quality of age-friendly community efforts? Overall, this discourse suggests three broad yet related yet distinct dimensions: effectiveness, equity, and sustainability. And I will briefly explain each of these dimensions here on this slide. So effectiveness, of course, refers to the extent to which an age-friendly community initiative is having impact. Is the initiative actually facilitating changes to policies, systems, and environments at the local level? And are these changes effectively improving experiences of later life and aging and community for residents? Whereas effectiveness addresses the outcomes and impact of an AFC initiative for the population at large, or a single group of residents at a given point in time, equity addresses the benefits of the initiative for one group relative to another group, especially in the context of structural inequalities, including by race, socioeconomic status, gender, health status, LGBT plus identification, and more. Orienting to issues of equity ensures that age-friendly community processes and outcomes are not one size fits all, which has a high likelihood of overlooking, especially underrepresented groups and populations, and that the efforts are engaging residents and subcommunities across diverse and disparate opportunities for later life health and well-being. Finally, the third dimension, sustainability, refers to the extent to which an initiative and its impact are long-lasting. We know that changing policies, systems, and environments within communities is hard work that often takes years, if not decades. Sustainability refers to whether efforts to improve age friendliness are enduring, especially when key variables shift. For example, does an initiative stay active even when there is a new mayor, perhaps a new mayor who was elected in response to dissatisfaction with the prior mayor? Or does the work continue after the completion of an initial philanthropic grant that inspired the launch of the initiative? These are examples of questions concerning sustainability. Next slide. So it's one thing to articulate that there's these three kind of buckets for characterizing the quality of age-friendly community initiatives, yet it's a whole nother issue to actually understand how to achieve them. What practices, in what contexts, and in what ways will give age-friendly community initiatives their best likelihood of achieving impact, of advancing equity, and of being sustainable. It is this question, how to better ensure that those dots on that map signify work that is optimally impactful, equitable, and long-lasting over time, is essential for better ensuring that age-friendly community initiatives are not simply another quote-unquote flash in the pan or short-lived trend in the field of aging, but rather a long-lasting transdisciplinary movement that goes beyond any one of our own organizations and arguably lifetimes. Next slide, please. Fortunately, the movement is beginning to make some progress around this question. Academic researchers and other thought leaders are beginning to advance knowledge on key conditions and processes that enhance the quality of age-friendly community implementation. Two of several themes emerging from this literature highlight the importance of, first, meaningfully involving older residents in age-friendly community change, and also facilitating multi-sectoral collaboration in the efforts. However, it is my position that to translate these insights into more effective, equitable, and sustainable action, we must go beyond stating that these things are important to actually building out theories of community practice to better achieve these two objectives. Regarding the meaningful involvement of older residents, I view the University of Manchester's pioneering work on co-production as precisely such a theory. As Dr. Buffel's earlier remarks alluded to, co-production offers age-friendly community leaders more specific insights on how to systematically facilitate depth and connection in older adults' involvement in age-friendly change in meaningful ways. In other words, the theoretical framework of co-production within the age-friendly community movement advances beyond merely recognizing that older adults should be involved toward praxis on how to more effectively achieve this. But what about theories to guide age-friendly community practice with respect to multi-sectoral collaboration? Theoretical development on this area, especially in terms of practice theory, is similarly essential. Next slide. Consider, for example, the World Health Organization's cycle of continuous improvement for age-friendly cities and communities. So much of this program model calls out the importance of partnerships and multi-organizational involvement. Setting up a committee, uniting stakeholders behind a common vision, securing support and resources for action, continuing to cultivate partnerships over time. How can age-friendly community leaders do all of this in ways that will enhance the effectiveness, equity, and sustainability of their community's age-friendly progress? Next slide, please. This question is the premise for a paper that I developed with several other academic researchers in the United States, which is forthcoming in The Gerontologist. In this paper, we present an overview of 3 theories of community collaboration, each which have developed outside the field of aging. They are asset-based community development, or ABCD, strategic doing, and collective impact. All 3 theories have originated from the US and more broadly North America, and they all address ways to cultivate collaborative processes through interorganizational groups, which make them especially relevant to understanding how to advance multi-sector collaboration in the context of age-friendly community work. While time and attention do not allow for me to go through each of these theories in today's remarks, I do want to spend a few minutes describing one in particular as an example to give you a better introductory sense of ways in which this family of theories offers great potential for advancing the movement. Next slide. Specifically, I will briefly describe strategic doing, especially since this is a theory that I myself am most familiar with and seems to fit best with the initiatives that I've been studying over the years in northern New Jersey. Next slide. Strategic doing begins with the idea that many of the challenges and opportunities facing communities today cannot be solved by a single person, a single organization, or even a single sector alone. While we would like to believe people like mayors or heads of transportation departments can just make something change, make it better, isn't that the rational thing to do? In so many ways, this is not the case for communities. The method is premised on the idea that community change oftentimes takes place through complex and non-hierarchical networks of individuals and groups. Strategic doing is a process for systematically and incrementally building and leveraging these networks to make change. Strategic doing uses a design-based approach as an alternative to engineering-based approaches. Engineering traditionally broadly, this is very broadly speaking, but traditionally has solved problems by studying them extensively, aggregating lots of different sources of information, speaking to various experts, then developing a solution, and then conducting tests to see that that solution was correct. In contrast, a design-based approach seeks to innovate through a more progressive, incremental process, whereby a group of people with intentionally different viewpoints convene, ideate on ways to make something better, select a general direction or develop a prototype that seems promising, and then try it out, evaluate it to see if they're on the right track, to learn in the process, to make adjustments, and to improve through an iterative process. Fitting with this approach, strategic doing involves convening a group of people who are ready to collaborate toward change, and then guides them through a process of developing a pathfinder project, collaboratively coming up with an idea to do something together within a relatively short period of time. Strategic doing describes a process for the group to select and implement a project that is both feasible, given the resources that they have at that time, and that is meaningful for the community at large. The project is not meant to be the end all be all of community change, but rather an opportunity to build trust and respect among group members, to demonstrate the value of working together, to show that change is possible, and to generate more ideas and insights toward longer term and scaled up change. Because strategic doing was developed by consultants who are hired to lead community practice, specifically in economic development efforts, the theory has many anchoring concepts to guide specific group processes. As one example, the concept of the 30-30 refers to getting groups into a rhythm of meeting about every 30 days. At each meeting, group members commit to taking some individual action before they meet next, and that the action should be based on their specific strengths, interests, and assets that they are uniquely able to contribute to the group. For example, if a group is planning a community health fair as their Pathfinder project, a local faith-based organization that is participating in the collaboration might commit to asking other faith-based leaders to share the flyer for the health fair in their newsletters. The local university might commit to drafting a participant satisfaction questionnaire to consider using at the event. And the local school committee might help connect the event organizers with the school administrator, who can see if the high school orchestra is able to perform at the fair. The idea is that each group member takes responsibility for a smaller piece of the project, reflective of their strengths, to enhance the whole and to experience the value of contributing to the collective. Throughout this process, group members intentionally and continuously learn about new directions and adjust their collective plans. One of the overarching concepts in strategic doing is agile leadership, which refers to a collection of skills and qualities that support leaders in guiding groups through collaborative processes. Agile leadership involves skills to cultivate trust and respect among members, honoring cognitive diversity among members, and helping groups achieve consensus on what exactly success from working together will look like. Next slide, please. So strategic doing, as one example of a theory of community collaboration, can begin to guide age-friendly community leaders on more intentional strategies to foster multi-sectoral collaborative processes, thereby deepening and improving their community practice and bolstering the effectiveness, sustainability, and equity of implementation. I want to conclude with some final thoughts on equity in particular. Next slide. It's important to note that neither strategic doing nor the other theories of community collaboration explicitly address issues of inequality. However, I would argue that their greater incorporation into the age-friendly community movement can advance aspirations toward equity in age-friendly communities in two primary ways, this one being the first. So these theories of community collaboration, with strategic doing as an example, allow us to begin to get kind of more under the hood of what makes age-friendly community change happen. How is it driven forward? Specifically, these theories orient attention to exactly who and who is not at the table. Who are the people who are coming now? Who are the people who we want to target to come later? And what is the significance of who is missing? And what are some strategic ways to include them at the table, or to consider ways in which the table just isn't their thing, and there needs to be other more equitable ways to involve them in the efforts. It also gives more attention to who is actually doing the work, as opposed to who is just talking about the work. And more generally, these theories orient greater attention to the relational dynamics of the people who are leading the change forward. And when we start thinking more carefully about the interpersonal human relationships that underlie so much of this work, it becomes a lot more apparent how issues of power among individuals, between organizations, and even across sectors are implicit at least, and can be made more explicit for the purposes of advancing issues of equity. Next slide, please. I think also the theories of community collaboration, like strategic doing, offer opportunity for advancing plurality in approaches to age-friendly community change. It's not explicit in the World Health Organization's cycle of continuous improvement, which is the predominant model for age-friendly community change, but we can see in it that there's very much a planning orientation with its emphasis on conducting community assessment, of developing an action plan, and then going forth to implement and evaluate progress and action toward those goals. And of course, the planning approach is very powerful and is appropriate and can achieve a lot of great things. But it doesn't mean that we can't open the movement up to other disciplinary approaches as well, especially approaches that might be more accessible for historically marginalized groups and organizations and individuals who are not at high levels of engagement in the movement yet. I put this quote from a Black feminist scholar in the United States. She wrote this in 1984. Sorry, I'm gonna let's read the quote. She wrote, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." And if we apply that logic to thinking about planning as a discipline and its historical legacy of ways in which it has influenced the current socio-spatial injustices that characterize so many cities and communities, I think it speaks to the need to welcome and embrace and seek out other tools or other approaches to moving forward with age-friendly community change as the theories of community collaboration implicate. Next slide. So I will conclude by just saying thank you so much for your attendance and your attention, and again for this opportunity to speak, especially in the context of this esteemed university and group and the game-changing work you all are doing at so many geographic levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. That was terrific. It's an interesting, actually powerful thought, the extent to which planning can both include and exclude different groups, particularly the kind of methodologies which we use. And I think you're right that that is an issue that's perhaps neglected or not really considered in the WHO model. And I do think in the American context, the way that there has been a stronger debate about the way inequalities of ethnicity, gender and class shape age-friendly interventions has been really important. So I'm really grateful for you making those that contribution. We'll pick up hopefully some of the points in the Q&A. And just a reminder that do put questions for Emily and Paul in particular, and Tine, of course, in the Q&A box, which we'll come to. After Paul McGarry, and a great pleasure for me to introduce Paul, who's going to be the discussant for our session. Paul really has been one of the pioneers of age-friendly work in the UK, but he has an international reputation. Paul is currently the Assistant Director of Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and he's been very influential in Greater Manchester becoming an age-friendly region. So Paul, delighted that you're able to join us and provide a discussion for this session. Over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to Tine and Emily for setting out, some really compelling presentations about the need to be doing this work, and really thoughtful presentations. It was particularly interesting to me listening to Emily's descriptions of the different types of approaches to the age-friendly agenda. And I wanted really to start by trying to explain to you where our entry point was into this work back in, I don't know, maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of predating the WHO age-friendly model. And for me, it was working in for Manchester City Council, which I'd done for 25 years, and being tasked really with trying to develop approaches around older people in the context of then a new Labour government, which was investing significant amounts of money in urban regeneration programs, large-scale regeneration programs in different parts of the city and the city region, actually. And what was really interesting to me, and has always been, I think, a feature of some of those challenges around urban planning and strategy that Chris referred to, is there was almost a complete absence of any account of growing older in these communities. Sometimes they were hinted at in terms of kind of health projects, and in terms of their objectives, in terms of the investment in their programs, and in terms of their evaluation. There was very little in terms of aging and older people. Actually, it was during those involvement in those programs where I met a number of colleagues who continue to work with us on the age-friendly agenda, either in Manchester or in other areas. And I think also at that time, what was interesting, as I was in a kind of social care policy team at the time, was that the respective gazes on aging, whether it was a social care perspective, a kind of medical or clinical perspective, and even a public health perspective on aging, and certainly housing perspective on aging, were all, I don't think, fit for purpose in trying to understand and think about the experience of older people in low-income areas with this huge population churn during that period. A couple of things then came into focus for us. First of all, we picked up on the work that Chris and colleagues had been doing around social exclusion in disadvantaged communities in the UK. And that really helped us starting to frame our understanding, and certainly my understanding, from this gerontological perspective on the experiences and the dynamics of growing old in urban areas. Around not long after the WHO launched their age-friendly research project, as it was initially, which then became the global network that we all know now. And for me, the age-friendly approach was the closest, I suppose, in terms of our understanding of what work needed to happen at a city scale, but also at a neighbourhood scale. So that's really why we got involved in the WHO programme. We're one of the first dozen or so cities, and then a few years ago, as I moved into the Greater Manchester area, we became an age-friendly city region. So I should also mention that we set up a UK network of age-friendly cities as well, as an opportunity, as a space to get people together who were interested in ageing from a perspective of urban change. So that's the kind of background. And partway through this process, actually, it was a paper that I think Tina and Chris led on. We tried to record, I think, what some of the success factors were in developing these programs. And I just want to reshare those with you, because I don't think they've changed much, actually. So first one was this issue of political leadership. Now, actually, I've been in situations where political leadership has been weak around this agenda, and you have to find ways of working around that situation. But certainly political leadership, as we've got now with Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, and with some of the other elected leaders, is a critical platform for enabling you to do things quickly. I think the second issue that we identified is this issue of capacity, and I'd go on to say expertise and infrastructure. You need a group of people, whether it's a multi-agency team or another configuration, people working together to really push this agenda forward. And I'll come back to that later on. You do need this multi-agency approach, as has been outlined. And you do need to find ways to give older people a leading role in this work outside of the kind of structures that quite often they're involved in. And last but not least, we need a story or a narrative of aging, which is realistic, but also I think stretches people's gaze beyond the here and now. What is the city going to look like in 10, 25, 30 years? And how is the city going to need to adapt over that period, as well as try and sort out some of the short-term challenges that we have? Now, that's really been the approach that we've taken in Manchester and Greater Manchester. But there have been some very specific features, I think, of our work in the last few years, and certainly in the last 18 months, in terms of context. And obviously, for those of us in the UK, the impact of austerity since 2010-11 on significant programs, whether it's regeneration, whether it's in social care, whether it's in the funding to local authorities, that have really undermined some of our efforts to create better places for older people to live. COVID, as has already been mentioned, has exposed those inequalities even more. And last but not least, I think from a strategic point of view, there's been what I describe as a gap in national leadership and then sometimes local leadership. And the gap occupies territory between national leaders around adult social care and healthcare services. And then, if you like, in that public health gaze, which tends to focus on people earlier in the life course. And in a way, what I think the age-friendly agenda has tried to do is create a new layer or focus of leadership between those two levels. For those of us in Greater Manchester, we've got a number of themes. They're a kind of an adaptation of the WHO themes. So we have work around work and skills, older workers. We have a programme around ageing in place, age-friendly neighbourhoods. We do work around housing and planning. We've got a new report coming out next month, or sorry, in September. And we also continue to do work around narrative and communications and around ageism. We also have a range of initiatives around what we call ageing well or healthy ageing, so public health initiatives, cultural initiatives. And more recently, we've developed a platform called the Innovation Partnership for Healthy Ageing, which is looking at how Greater Manchester PLC, if you like, can take advantage of growth opportunities. I just wanted to finish off really by covering 2 or 3 points about how we work, and maybe touching on some of the points that Emily highlighted in her contribution. I think the first thing is that I think that there is a period of reflection for us coming out of COVID in the age-friendly movement or age-friendly spaces, because I think whilst there have been some opportunities for us to give a platform to our work, I'm particularly concerned about the lack of our ability sometimes to influence mainstream agendas. So I think we need to think through, and we need a new discussion about how our insights from the age-friendly world add value to mainstream policy discussions, whether it's about economy, housing in the UK, levelling up, and so on and so forth. I think we need to kind of slightly reset how we do that. I think we need to double our efforts or triple our efforts to give older people more effective voices in the UK. I think the organisations and agencies that we have aren't doing the job well enough. I think the work that we've done in Manchester has been fantastic, but I think we need to see more of that across the UK. And I think we can learn from North America, from Scandinavia, and from other countries about that. I think we have to be open to new agendas coming online. I think we're celebrating International Older People's Day this year in the UK with a focus around the green agenda, and I think we need to orientate ourselves to those concerns. I also think we need to again redouble our efforts around neighbourhood and community initiatives around ageing for all the reasons that we know about. The last point I want to make really is about collaboration. We need to find new ways to collaborate on our agenda. It seems to me that we still haven't worked out how to bring together the expertise that we have in the UK and internationally in our agenda, and to connect that to the day-to-day experiences of groups of older people, particularly those in low incomes and from some socially excluded communities and groups. And this project that we're launching today is another example of how we want to do that. So I'm really looking forward to our work. We've been doing it for a long time. There's plenty for us to do, and I can't wait to get on to the next phase. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, that's a great last comment, Paul. Excellent. That was really powerful stuff. And I think the record of work in Manchester has been outstanding. I would pick up the point about political leadership. I think from my experience, just going back to the work in the city council, there were strong mayors who were committed to age-friendly work. And we now, of course, have a Greater Manchester region mayor in Andy Burnham, who is very supportive. So I think that political leadership point is extremely important. Right, we still have 10 minutes, just under 10 minutes for discussion. And we've got some great questions actually in the Q&A. So I'd like to pick these up and throw them at the panel. The first one is a very important one actually from Nora Keating, who is working with researchers and policymakers in the global south, and makes the point actually that their age-friendly initiatives have not had the traction in the global south, sub-Saharan Africa, etc. I mean, what can we do about that? Are there kind of ways in which we might make age-friendly work more attractive, more realistic, perhaps, for research and policy agendas in the global south? Emily, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really appreciate calling that out. I mean, when you look at the map, right, it's a really important point to distill from the map that you can interpret in so many different ways, and that point can't be made enough. I mean, I think first, just being honest about that and explicit is a good first step forward in having some more serious conversations. I think the regional inequities or patterns in where the movement has picked up and where it hasn't picked up is reflective of smaller scales of geography. It's kind of a global version of the microcosms of how these things develop, especially in the context. I mean, I think it's really important to recognize that in national context, there aren't really like dedicated policy funding streams to support age-friendly community work. And so it's like the movement is embedded in the context that it's trying to work against at the same time in this historical moment. And so I don't think, as a social scientist, like I wouldn't necessarily hypothesize anything different. I mean, in that policy context, this is what you kind of get. And I think just, acknowledging that is really important. Now, that being said, I think the movement has a real kind of tension between what it wants to, how it wants to go about doing that beyond just talking about it. And I think it is very easier to fall into the idea of like, well, it's just a matter of getting, key people in those geographies to kind of join us or latch on to the model that we've put forth. And I don't know if that's actually going to be successful. I think there's this kind of growing theoretical discourse outside of age-friendly in the United States, at least, on to step away from models of inclusion, that it isn't inclusion what we should be aspiring to for issues of equity. It should be more kind of like recognizing where regions, communities, individuals are at on their own terms, and not saying like, we just want you to do what we're doing and we're going to try to remove barriers to get you there.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, just a quick observation, and then there's another very interesting question I want to get to before we have to finish. But Paul, any thoughts on that one?
Well, you know, I've been involved in the WHO Global Network since 2010-11, and I absolutely recognise and endorse Emily's comments. You know, I think we have enough challenges, actually, if you like, selling and mobilising cities and agencies around the age-friendly agenda. I think there can only be you know, far more difficult in the global south, particularly in Africa. You know, I think it's a huge challenge, and I think we shouldn't make assumptions that our model is the right one at all.
Just one more question I'd like to pick up in the chat, and Emily, I think this is a good one for you. How do we reconcile varying values and needs within participating groups when you're doing co-production work? I think that's an extremely interesting point, that, you know, the groups we work with are not all the same. They think differently, they have different approaches. I mean, how do you reconcile that in the kind of work that you do? And you've only got 2 minutes to answer.
Well, as it concerns co-production, I would leave that one to Tina. But as it concerns multi-sectoral collaborations, I think,
yeah,
again, I mean, in the age-friendly community movement, it's really easy to say, like, just figure out what older adults want and try to be responsive to that, or convene a group and you all get around and you develop consensus. You know, these things are, once you start really thinking about issues of power and disparities and diversity in serious ways, you readily see that these underlying assumptions don't work anymore. They're just not the way communities work, not the way groups work. And so I think, again, kind of honing in on this point, that you need to invest in leaders, like both financially, but also in terms of skill development, that navigating these issues is practice, it's skill. It's not something everybody can just do, you know, and figure out on their own, and really enhancing the capacity of people to lead communities through these complexities in a much more intentional way than we are in this moment. And I hope 20 years from now, we'll look back and we'll be like, oh, wow, that was really, you know, like the 1.0 version. How far have we come along? But we have some work to do, I think, to get to that point.
Well, I'm going to give a final word to Tina on this, because Tina, the implication of that question is that co-production work is actually very difficult work in a way, and the wider band of people we involve and embrace, which we should do, the harder it becomes, because groups have different beliefs, they have different values, and sometimes they have to be called out, and they, you know, may feel alienated by that. So any quick last thoughts on the issues of co-production that you come across that we need to consider?
Yeah, just to reinforce that, I think I agree, co-production is definitely not an easy process, and the idea that we have to reach consensus, I think, is one that we need to leave behind, because I think co-production should be mostly about ensuring that the most underrepresented groups and the seldom heard voices become, you know, have an opportunity to speak and express their voices. So I think I'd keep it there. There's lots more to say about co-production, but I'll keep that for another time.
Yeah, no, I think it's the complexity of co-production is something we do tend to underestimate in our work, and I think that's that's important. That one last question, actually, for Paul, for you in the chat box, is question and answer is role of technology. What's the extent to which you think technology is going to change, different forms of technology are going to change age-friendly practice? Again, just a quick response to that.
Well, you're talking to somebody who can't switch on their printer, but I think it is inevitable. We know in the last 5 years in particular, there's been an absolute explosion from the tech giants and from smaller companies in this space. I think the challenge for those of us in public services is to try and get the best version of those initiatives and those products and services into older people's lives, and to use our leverage that we've got through our institutions to do that. You know, we've got an ambition to get people over 75 online in Greater Manchester. So, you know, we're an actor. We need to be an actor in these discussions rather than just waiting for it to happen.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank everybody, the participants, contributors to this event, and also all of you who signed up for it. But Tina, Paul, Emily, many thanks for really great contributions. Tina, a very exciting research program, and over the next 5 years, it's going to blast a whole new agenda into urban aging. And I think it's, you know, the group as a whole, the interdisciplinarity of the group is very exciting. So many thanks, everybody. And thanks again to those of you all of you participated in the event. Look forward to seeing you again, I hope, in the near future. Many thanks.